You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. In today's episode, we're going to tackle a question that's been coming up more and more recently, which is this age-old question of, is Amazon pushing people from 1P to 3P? And so I've had a lot of conversation over the past, few weeks here. Ton of different things are taking place, from inventory reduction to a lot of issues over Turkey 5, where Amazon was pushing customer service calls on the vendor side to vendors. And so it's just one of those things that, it seems to be a trend that's been going on for years now, that every now and again, this topic comes up. And so I've got a great friend, partner, supporter of the network, Garrett Bloom over at Drafted Commerce. He's been part of the network, I think, since pretty much we might have kicked this off, Garrett, like years ago. But anyways, I don't mind if you want to jump in and do a brief intro on yourself and Drafted Commerce. That'd be awesome. And then we can kind of jump into the conversation. Sound good?
Sure. Yeah. Garrett Bloom. I've been in the e-commerce kind of industry for a little over 13 years now. So seen a lot of the changes arise over time. Been directly working with Amazon in some form or capacity since around 2011, 2010 timing around. And started it on the CPG side. So very familiar with the larger kind of brand kind of aspects, was part of the original Reckitt team that launched e-commerce. Dozens of folks from there have now passed on and are now in, different types of roles and capacities within the industry. Worked at Unilever, Highlands, and then worked at Pattern on their kind of international expansion and strategy team. And then started up Drafted Commerce about, 3 years ago now. Drafted is primarily, it started as more of a PE kind of focus with helping private equity groups determine valuation on brands and just understanding the complexities around Amazon and what's, also within like just big box retail and .com retail. It quickly turned into us kind of running services as well. So we run Amazon services as well as advertising services. We run a lot of other multi-channel kind of retail advertising as well. One of our biggest fortes is solving very complex issues, helping people with massive price overhauls, price matching in Costco to Amazon, just getting the understanding and building strategies to subvert or to kind of fix or kind of apply, tactics that will prevent those types of issues from happening. We've helped over the last 3 years, probably 60 brands with various capacities. And a lot of it relates to this 1P, 3P conversation. We've had brands leaving 1P or trying to, setting up third-party seller accounts, trying to figure out the hacks behind that, how to do it in a way that Amazon won't kick them off. We've seen brands leaving third-party resellers, trying to go themselves. We've seen vice versa, some brands trying to move into the 1P space. So, very kind of familiar with the slowdowns, the challenges there. We've got several vendors that we're working with right now who are experiencing a lot of these challenges, and they do come to us quite often with this question of, what's next year going to look like? Are we going to be 3P or are we going to stay 1P? Like that's a serious question a lot of brands are having right now.
Yeah. It's where I see it is, if I go way back, right? Do you remember that email that went out? It was right around Shop Talk time, maybe like 4 years ago, where Amazon sent out that email to all these vendors saying, you're no longer a vendor, go sign up for Seller Central. And there was like mass panic.
Yeah.
Right. And then all of a sudden, Amazon's like, oh, whoops, an email went out by mistake. I don't think the email went out by mistake. I think they sent it out and underestimated the uproar it would cause and the chaos that would ensue, as everybody was sort of like, I don't even know what I'm doing on the third party side. Do you remember that email?
I do. Yeah. It had a lot of backlash to it. I think I wrote like an article around it. Like it was a time, and it's weird because it correlated really closely to when Amazon got rid of Vendor Express, which was a mini version of 1P Vendor Central for, basically it was started out for like not Kickstart, brands on the Launchpad type of program. So yeah, it's really interesting, like that timeline where Amazon was, hey, maybe we just, we batch into, and there was all these like conversations with Amazon. Oh, well, you're a tier 1 brand, you're a tier 2 brand. Well, what classifies a tier 1 to 5 brand? Who knew, right?
Yeah. It was all like
guessing.
vendor manager specific. Like they're just
Exactly.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. One vendor manager is like, oh, anyone doing under $1.5 million or 2 million, they're classified as a tier 3. So like they're probably more at risk versus that. But then it turns out like, oh, well, your brand, you're still like one of the top market share leaders. So you're not applying to that. Like, it was just like super weird timing on that.
Yeah. But I think that was one of the first major, what I've been looking at is this like guardrail shift where Amazon does it to move that guardrail over a little bit. And they keep nudging it in sometimes little ways, in some way, big ways, but then slowly they'll bring the other guardrail in too. And so over time, they haven't come out and said, hey, by the way, we're diverting traffic, but over time they started to divert traffic. And then, we had, a lot of issues pop up when, Amazon was looking at this, the non-essential items. We're not going to ship these for a while. And that was this indication that brands had to go find another way to ship product. And as they went down that path, like I think what they found was, in my opinion, so back when I was at Perico, right, we couldn't originally do anything on the Seller Central side because we couldn't individually relieve inventory. We couldn't individually pick, pack, ship. So as Amazon was going out early on, trying to get these big players in the space, they're like, hey, put it on the marketplace. They're like, we can't. Like literally the smallest item we can actually ship is a case.
Yeah.
And so to grab all these brands, right, they actually had to buy and hold inventory in full case quantities. But I think a lot of that has shifted over the course of the pandemic, right? And a lot of it was in response to that, where if you wanted to ship an item, you had to be able to individually pick, pack, ship it out of your own warehouse. And so, have you seen a lot of brands like update their ERP system? Is this something that's like top of mind?
Yeah, ERPs are being updated, warehouse management systems. There's been a massive surge on 3PLs recently, just because people are trying to figure out how can I ship in smaller quantities to fulfill these POs. We've got brands with chargebacks like galore, just because Amazon systems are kind of antiquated from how their systems operate. So we're getting, on-time PO compliance issues, a lot of, issues that really the nuts and bolts. Like we've had one of them like come back and Amazon did an investigation on all of these old chargebacks and old shortages and all these things. And basically Amazon was like, well, we found like 30% of them, like what they're tied to. The other 70%, can you tell us why we're billing you for those? Literally asking them to provide the reasons why. And it's like, what the hell? Like, what do we do here? Right? Like there's a lot of questions related to those issues. And I think that, as we kind of progress this conversation, I think there's some other kind of insights into like the rationale behind why all of these things are happening. I mean, we saw similar things even in 2014, right? In 2014, Amazon, like pre-2014, it was like, vendors, give us every single unit, every product you have, we'll sell it as an each. 2013, 2014, actually, we're going to start to bundle some of these things. So they started prepping and kitting in-house. 2014 comes along. You know what? Some of these things are just not profitable for us. We're crapping out things. Like you guys could sell those on Seller Central, or actually you can't because there's an MOA policy involved here, the manufacturer on Amazon policy. So all these brands were like, well, crap, I've gotten hooked on this idea that every product should be on Amazon. Now I've got to go and find a PharmaPax or somebody to sell this unit on my behalf with really crappy shipping times and hopefully make it work type of thing, which clearly didn't for that specific company. But yeah, it's been, very interesting seeing the progression in the last 3 years. I think it was escalated. COVID, I think, did a number to Amazon that they weren't expecting. Number one, the growth rates were quite striking on just the overall Amazon volume that was being pushed through. I mean, Amazon's being sued right now for, hitting longer than 2-day lead times and things like that. It's stupid news. Like, okay, yeah, like during the pandemic, of course, you're not going to be able, like when all this demand comes in, the 2-day promise is kind of cut down. Like they're promising as fast as they can get it to you type of thing. But, at the end of the day, the infrastructure costs that they incurred during that period, I think they started to see this, hey, 2020 is going really well. 2021 was going really well. They massively invested in infrastructure. They launched a ton of different warehouses. I think at the beginning of this year, they started to recognize, I think we may have overshot this. So they started to cut back. We saw a lot of, selling off of these warehouses. And I think that the vendor side actually had the majority. And you can kind of see how this is all related. 3Ps got hit really hard during COVID because non-essential items, Amazon was still placing massive POs on the 1P side. 3P was cut down on inventory limits really, really hard. So the 1P side was still eligible to have these larger POs, like everyone needs toilet paper, bulk orders. But the third party side was like, we're screwed. Like we can't ship in products. FBA lead times on this is like, month out type of thing, 2 months out. So it did hurt on the 3P side. Now we're seeing, well, maybe those infrastructures that they invested on the 1P side, they're shifting that. They're lowering that 1P inventory allotment, which is then all of the inventory that was held at those warehouses is being shifted over into, they're not selling all the units right away. They're shifting all this reserve inventory into these other warehouses, just reducing the overall capacity, right? So there has been this time limit is how I've kind of seen it over the last year or so, or 6 months really, of what they've been doing from an inventory crunch on the vendor side. Meanwhile, the 3P side, there's some limits, there's some expectations, there's harder limits with like flammable storages, with oversized boxes and things like that. But really at the end of the day, most of them are sitting in a pretty decent inventory position. So you can kind of see how the business entities, 3P and 1P, they're at odds in certain time periods. And right now we're seeing a flourishing of the 3P side in a really kind of a tougher position for the 1P side. Flip it 2.5 years ago, and it was the complete opposite.
Yeah, I just see, like, for those of you, who are on the 1P side, this reduction in inventory that Amazon, was holding 12 to 14 weeks worth of inventory. We did an earlier podcast on this with, I think, Corey over at DaVinci Micro Fulfillment around what's going on with the POs. He's a micro fulfillment center and backs up for a lot of brands for the third party fulfillment, FBM. But what's happening is, like, Amazon in this time of scarcity was holding that 12 to 14 weeks worth of inventory. And now they know everybody's flush with inventory on their own. So they just like, hey, we know we only need to hold 2 to 3 weeks. I think 0.6 weeks is the metric that people have been like, has come up over, 0.6 months is kind of the target. And what we have then is brands who stop getting normal POs in October. And all of these brands that thought they were going to hit, on the Amazon side, we're going to hit their number and beat their number, all of a sudden stop getting POs. Yeah. And now they're going to miss on a number. And they're not getting normal POs because Amazon's trimming this down to 2 weeks. That means 10 weeks without POs, or 10 weeks of very, very diminished POs. And that now has people saying, what if I go out of stock? You can't hold just 2 weeks. If my competitor goes out of stock, all of that traffic goes to mine, and then I go out of stock. And that's kind of what you're getting to was, the third party backup, right?
Yeah.
Is that where you're advising people to go?
It's interesting. So you're spot on. Over the last 6 months, kind of reiterating a little bit and I'll add some context to a couple personal experiences here too. Some brands, like 12, 15 weeks on hand inventory. Q2, Amazon had really large POs. Q3, not so large POs, right? Like everybody was like, what the heck's going on here? In Q4, we all thought it was going to clear up and be like, oh, it's going to be fine and dandy in Q4. It's just one quarter of clearing up. It still has, some brands are seeing POs come through, but the inventory levels are just much lower at a holding standpoint. We did see, and it's interesting if you correlate it to the stock market as well, because I'm, theorist of that Amazon is operated by the stock market, essentially. They're down like 45% this year, Amazon stock. That's pretty bad. Like they're really, really bad. Means they were over, inflated from a valuation. And this has also impacted, I think, every single industry that's related to Amazon. Consolidators, resellers, agencies, everything is like just taking a hit in valuation because, well, the beast was at this really big point and inflection point over the last couple of years from a value side of things. And now it's just like, hey, we're back into reality a little bit here. This is a retailer. They have their own product. Sure, they have a bunch of other things that are way more profitable than that, but this is a lot of their business. So as we start to see stocks decline, Amazon's going to tighten up the belt. So one thing is looking at, hey, we've got a crap ton of inventory. with Q3, if we're expecting a slower Q3, let's just order a lot less and our profit margins should go up for that quarter, right? So it's looking at things in tandem, and like that's a natural way because they're front loading these POs on the seller side. It's like, sure, like have them put it in there. Like this is inventory that they're paying for. We're actually going to increase the storage rates. We're going to increase your FBA fees. We're going to have this new tax on you, and that was announced in April or May for this COVID kind of surge period. So all of those things haven't disappeared. The seller costs are still higher, but they're making money and generating money at almost as a 3PL at their FBA centers. On the 1P side, it's complete opposite. It's a sunk cost. They've got inventory that they're holding that they have to hopefully sell through. So I 100% think that there's probably multiple reasons behind it. It's probably a tightening of the belt from an infrastructure standpoint, as well as from a profitability standpoint of how much inventory you want to hold on hand as a retailer.
Which begs the question, are they pushing people to 3P? It's straight profit at that point in time, right? So on the vendor side, you're buying it. Yeah, you're holding the inventory, but you got the carrying cost. You've got all the liability around it. Or you just turn into a marketplace.
Yeah.
You still have the same warehouses, but people are giving you the FBA storage fees. Like everything is profit at that point in time, right? You don't have the liability on the product that's sitting there. I mean, that's where I think there'll be, the high volume products that they'll always want to make sure that they have on hand. But it seems like a logical step. This is where Alibaba's at, right? I mean, this is where everybody's scratched their head for years. Why isn't Amazon just a marketplace?
Yeah. It's a question that comes up quite frequently. And we're already seeing a lot of vendors preparing for, certain elements or outcomes. I think there's kind of a mix. There's a lot of vendors who are doing dropship vendor, kind of being forced into that as a potential model that they can fulfill and continue to maintain inventory positions. Then there's the brands that are prepping for, hey, like we got to get this into gear for a 3P launch next year. And what does that mean? You have to be super, super compliant because Amazon's policies have not changed. I'm looking at the standards for brands selling in the Amazon store policy. So this policy was essentially relabeled back in 2019. It used to be the manufacturers on Amazon policy, which basically back then it said manufacturers can only, like if you're 1P, you can only be 1P. If you're 3P, you can only be, you can be 3P unless we invite you to 1P. It's essentially the same kind of messaging, but it expands it to like the reasons behind why, like, hey, we want to make sure we include high stock rates, which 1P is failing on. So that's kind of interesting that they're forcing people to stay 1P based off of a metric that they're failing on. Their delivery experience, price competitiveness, selection completeness, they can determine and make a case off of brands. I think that at the end of the day, it really comes down to price competitiveness. Amazon doesn't want 3Ps fully taking over the market because 3Ps have a lot more control over price point. Not full control. Amazon's implemented since that 2019 policy came out, the standards came out. Amazon's updated the 3P kind of backend with competitive price points. They've got suppressed buy box issues suppressed buy box kind of triggers that they can pull if you're not competitive. So there are ways that they're influencing, like kind of like with a carrot or more of with a stick on getting 3Ps to increase their price. But on the 1P side, they have full control. So you're going to be the lowest price possible every time. I think that kind of situation is less needed now on the 1P side to maintain price integrity because of what the 3P side has done. That being said, 3P, for larger mass brands who have a lot of competition, who have a lot of exposure into multi-retail channels, so large CPGs, most vendors essentially, they're still in a position where I might not be profitable going 3P. And they're trying to scramble and figure out, are there pack size? I mean, look at the pet space, dog food, things like that, like heavy, bulky products, very tough to make work as a 3P. And so the 1P side kind of keeps that as hey, this is a lost leader for us. We got to compete against Chewy here. They'll hound them for additional funding. I think the 1P side had the advantages for Amazon on the 1P side is that they can push these vendors around pretty aggressively with negotiations because you can't really change your credit costs very easily. You can also have negotiations around accruals. You can also, as Amazon, say, hey, we're not going to order these products, threaten brands unless they do give you more funding. Hey, you got to commit to spending X amount of dollars in media display and all of these kinds of areas. So I think that's a little bit of control that Amazon, I don't think they're ready to give up yet. So, in essence, long-winded kind of explanation here, but I think that the 3P moving to 1P or 1P moving to 3P, excuse me, I don't think it's a full stop hard transition. I don't think Amazon can. I think that they're too embedded with the 1P side. I think that the integrations that they've built out with it are just too adaptive and too much tied to their overarching kind of business units that it'll be impossible for them to always kind of say, hey, you have to be 3P now as a brand. I think that it would be, maybe in 20 years from now, maybe in 10 years from now, I don't know what the future predicts and what that holds, but I don't think for the next couple of years that Amazon's going to be dropping 1P by any means. Now, as a brand though, you have to determine whether or not you're comfortable with the control completely being in Amazon's hands and saying, hey, you're only keeping, 2 weeks, 3 weeks on hand inventory. Well, what about my sale that I've got going? I have a coupon that's increasing my sell-through rate by 1.5 times. I've got a week and a half of inventory and I'm out of stock. You can't hold that against the brand for wanting to pursue a 3P option or, some other type of alternative.
Yeah. I'm advising everybody right now. If you haven't evaluated and put that plan, a major thing you need to do in Q1 of next year is do that evaluation of 1P versus 3P and what it's going to take to get you there. I'm not saying, again, that Amazon's going to, I don't think they'll ever come out and just do that email again. I think they'll keep moving the guardrails, but you're going to want to know what it's going to take and have a project plan that you can just pull the trigger on. You're not going to want to be caught flat-footed where, Amazon does push your brand. I don't think they're going to do it holistically, but they may push brands that way. Or you might take a look at it and say, hey, I've gone out of stock. Well, you're saying I've gone out of stock 5 times, right? If you're owning the Amazon account and they're only holding a week and a half worth of inventory, they are limiting, right, the amount of advertising you can do, right? And that's just because you're not driving more because you don't want to go out of stock. We saw this happen all the time over the pandemic. People, especially last year when they were limited on inventory, a lot of brands, they were pulling back on paid media.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to go out of stock. They just want to kind of nurse it along until they get the next container in. And now, I think if you're going to be held accountable, then you better be taking a look at what the third party looks like and just, it doesn't mean you pull the trigger on it, but hey, these are all the things we need to have in place within the company. Because if your ERP system can't individually relieve inventory 1 unit at a time, you want to be sitting down with IT, with the CIO and saying, hey, this is a major initiative that we're going to at least want to have in the works.
100%.
But I see this over and over again when brands do the 1P versus 3P evaluation, the margins are about the same at the end of the day. Do you see except for a few acute cases, it seems like most of the time Amazon knows how much they're making and they balance it out on both sides. So it doesn't really, really matter. But a lot of people think if you're on the 3P side, there's more money on the 1P side, or if you're on the 1P side, you think there's more money on the 3P side. I don't find it true.
Yeah, the answer is it can be, and it's very, very, very much brand specific. I would say to build out your 3P versus 1.3 P&L, there's a few pieces of information you need. Some of those on the 3P side are very transparent. You can go to the profitability calculator, type in an ASIN. There's APIs. There's also massive downloads you can do from Keepa or other kind of places where you can just get all of the FBA estimates based off of each of the ASINs. Well, anyway, you get the FBA costs, your commission rate, your 15% typically. Sometimes on certain categories, it's 8 or 5 or 10, depending on the price points your products are at as well. You can then start to figure out, okay, here's my 3P costs. If you want to figure out, okay, well, beyond those two key KPIs, what other potential costs are going to be incurred on my seller account just from maybe inventory shipping in, things like that. I would just buffer it with a 3 to 5% buffer window. If you're in apparel, maybe a little bit higher for returns, but usually you give it that much. So at the end of the day, most 3Ps are around 60, 65%, at the end of the day kind of thing, from a margin side of things at the net from where your retail's at. Now, this is, again, dependent on price point. because the variable is the shipping cost doesn't change. So if you're shipping a product that's $1,000, that $5 shipping cost is very, very tiny. But if you're shipping something that's $10, that shipping cost at $5 is very, very much 50% of your cost, right? So you have to take that into consideration. So if you're a luxury brand, very likely that the 3P side is going to be much more profitable for you. If you're a premium kind of price point brand, same thing. Unless there are exceptions. If you're very bulky, very heavy, that's another potential issue. So if you're selling something that's 100 pounds, like a refrigerator, or like something that's like more than 100 pounds, you've got issues with, lots of costs for shipping, because you're going to have to drop those off at the individual doorsteps, things like that. So there's, things that you have to consider, and you have to look at your own infrastructure and see what you're capable of shipping as well. There's also the diagnosis of, hey, are we doing a lot of drop shipping ourselves? Maybe an FBM fulfillment might be the way to go for us as we're trying to taper into, a backfill. So you have a 1P and you do FBM fulfillment. Now, if you're going to have 3P kind of presence, there are some things that you have to be aware of. That Amazon can track that. Don't use the same EIN, don't use the same business address, don't use the same bank account. And if you want to put a tinfoil hat on, like I do, use a VPN when you're logging into a separate account. Like, you just don't want Amazon to get a connection between the two. If you do, one of them, Amazon could build a case against you to enforce and say, hey, you got to remove your seller account. I saw that more last year. Haven't seen it nearly as much this year. Did see a couple large brands who had seller accounts completely demolished because Amazon forced them to back into the 1P side. So, we're not seeing it as aggressively pushed now, but it is something that's always of concern, because, we never know how Amazon ebbs and flows. Next year could be a new, new category manager that wants the bonus, or new vendor manager. And so he's like, hey, you got to move all this inventory back over to the 1P side. We're opening up some, more unit volume for you guys. So it's about separating those entities. If anybody has questions around that, I'm happy to, send over a list of the things that I would do. But it is interesting to see the 1P rationale behind all of this too. So I was on a call recently. I'll leave out names and brands and things like that. But someone at Amazon essentially said that, they feel the pain as well on the vendor side of the inventory constraints, because they're getting pushback a lot right now on ad spend and other types of media efforts and things like that. One of the vendor managers mentioned that in Q1, it's expected towards the end of Q1 that Amazon's going to be opening up more fulfillment centers for the 1P side in this specific category. So they're hoping that, after Q1, the inventory will start to, slowly increase again. Now, again, this is one person. We hear this all the time from, different vendor managers. This could be something that's real, could be something. And I would imagine that Amazon's going to take a look at their out of stock rates and probably say, this is a bad idea. Like, we need to adjust some things and fix this. They're doing massive layoffs. This is the other challenge, is that interest rates are high. Like, they've got, capital that they would want to invest in these things, but it's going to be a much higher cost than it was last year for the infrastructure. So that's something that they're going to take into consideration as they're building out that infrastructure. It's probably not going to be nearly as much to where it was last year. We're not going to have that uncapped ability to ship in 20 weeks of on-hand inventory. It's probably going to be limited still, but hopefully, a month, 2 months worth of inventory is my hope.
Yeah. I mean, you're mentioning something around, it is, you get a new vendor manager in, and hey, maybe they're open to it, maybe they're not. And, I think everybody needs to be aware. But, I think a lot of people know that people on Amazon bounce around all the time. But I always tell people, like, if you've got somebody and the partner in Amazon, vendor manager, whoever it might be, and they're on board and helping you out, ride the horse as hard and as fast as you can and get as much stuff in. But also know if that person's not there, in 9 months, everything might change. It was a large footwear brand that was selling through an exclusive third-party reseller. And they said, hey, we want to go back and we actually want to open up our own third-party account. When they went to do that, Amazon said, no, you're your first part, you're a vendor. You have to be a vendor. Like, wait, there's a third-party account over here selling it. Can't we just open up our own third-party account? No way. Fast forward in 9 months, new vendor manager in place. Like, I don't care. Open up a third-party account. They started rolling with it. It was like, the weirdest thing. So it's good and it's bad, right? Sometimes the change works for you and sometimes it works against you. But it's one thing I think that will be consistent is that Amazon is inconsistent in and of itself. Are there other things that are like popping up on your side, maybe paid media, advertising? Are there any differences on the 1P versus the 3P side that people should be aware of?
I think that the only more recent thing that's happened this month, I would assume, for a lot of vendors is there's a little bit of uproar around the data that Vendor Central is providing now through their retail analytics platform. They basically diminished and got rid of their old platform. They've been in this transition for a while. I personally think the new system is very, very clunky. It provides about half of the information that used to exist from just like the last couple of months. And this is still like, what's interesting is like, this happened years ago when Vendor Central used to have the net receipts tab as well, where you could see like a ton more information about like how Amazon was receiving, what was happening with those inventory levels, like how much revenue you got from like a net receipts. Now, like you have to go in and calculate like POs. You have to go in and calculate, like it's a nightmare. Like it's not an easy feat for vendors at this time from a data perspective. And so when applying that to advertising and to media, it's more challenging to build a case, in my opinion. Like, I can't like look at year over year comps without actually historically polling each of these reports daily and like going through all of these things. Whereas on the Seller Central side, the data is like free flowing. Like it's so much better. Like it's really bifurcated how Amazon Vendor Central works versus Seller Central works from an analytics side of things. It's almost like they're trying to keep them in the dark a little bit more on the vendor side. And sure, Amazon owns the retail inventory. So like they're probably assuming like, hey, we put in a PO, you guys don't get to determine anything, but it is still a self-service platform. Like vendors still have to go in there and update their if Amazon was running everything, I could see, yeah, that makes sense. But the fact that they're kind of diminishing all of this data points, it's going to hurt, I think, their ability to even, get more incremental funding and things like that. And maybe it's another play, like maybe Amazon's using it as a play, like, hey, if you invest certain levels, then we'll give you more data that we were giving you before, type of thing. That's also another possibility for 2023.
Or they want people to go try the third party, the Seller Central side, and they see, right, how great the data can be and everything that they could have. And then people do a natural move over. And then rather than Amazon having to come in saying, hey, you guys need to jump over here, they're giving everybody every incentive in the world, and how it's self-selecting as a whole.
That's a very good possibility that it is tied to, and it's interesting as you're mentioning this, and as I'm thinking through it, like it could be like that. This is more of a momentum shift at the macro level. That hey, we want to keep some vendors, but like a lot of these smaller vendors, a lot of these other players that were not profitable, a lot of these other areas, we're gonna slowly like just make life harder on them and see if they move 3P. Without telling the vendor managers, because they don't want to make their vendor managers like, hey, like your job is going to be gone in like a couple of years type of thing, right? So they're probably, this could be a theory, like a tinfoil hat theory, that they, higher up executives are on that kind of boat of like, hey, like this is a long-term strategy. Like we're going to shift to 20% of our revenue being 1P, 80% 3P. And right now it's, in that 40 range type of thing. So, that's a big cut, like if that's their intended goal. And, just the vendor managers are like, well, I don't know what's going on. So they're going to still enforce these policies and try to force people to stay 1P. So there's just like all this discontent and like kind of, obscurity within how the vendors react when it kind of comes to play.
Yeah, I think it's a profitability issue. I think that's what they're looking at. There's that, a couple of famous quotes, I think, that Jeff made back in the day. And one was hey, your margin is my opportunity, which I always laugh when people are, executive teams are still like, oh, wait, well, why is Amazon our lowest, margin around? Well, he clearly stated he was coming for it. So he just went out and said it. But the other one was when they asked him about Amazon and, he's like, I don't know, maybe, and I'm obviously paraphrasing a little bit. Yeah, it'll probably last 30, 40 years, 30 to 40 years. And that was almost 30 years ago. From the time they started, like they have to make some adjustments. They have to. And it's been interesting to see the shift from Amazon as the new, behemoth, and it's going to take over to a lot, and why is Walmart keep stumbling to this, who's probably going to still be around for sure in 10 years is Walmart.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I don't think that the demand on Amazon has dropped much, but it could be just a shift in their business model and operations to be able to survive going forward. Because they're probably looking at these things and seeing where it could go into the near future. And recognizing hey, that's not a direction we need to make. So we need to course correct this slowly. Another quote, by the way, that I freaking love from Jeff Bezos, of course. There was during one of his presentations, someone was presenting to him to basically increase the amount of data that vendors got. This is a few years ago, but and this is again, secondhand. So who knows how true this is, but I believe it. There was a pitch to basically build out a bigger vendor platform, from analytics side of things. And Jeff's response was, we're in the business of helping people buy things, not helping people sell things. And that has always rung true in the way that I always perceive how Amazon operates. Anytime you're looking at anything that could happen next year, Amazon's out for the customer, not out for you as a brand. Not out for you as a seller, not out for you as a vendor. It's the customer that matters. So if there's something that's going to make the customers happy, great. That's going to be great. But if it's making a brand mad, they don't really care that much.
Right. It's funny you say that because I was at the Unboxed, event for Amazon out in New York last month or whenever it was. And, it hit me there. It was a really neat event from a networking standpoint. And they brought in the Killers to do a concert, and the food was great. The atmosphere was great. I mean, the content was lacking. It was really, really scripted, but it was funny how much Amazon was pouring in to brands, which doesn't usually happen. Right. Yeah. But then it hit me. Oh, wait, in this case, it's an Amazon advertising conference. They're customers. Yeah. Everybody that walked in the door was looking to buy advertising from Amazon, and Amazon was looking to sell advertising to them.
Yeah.
So it was a great event, right? These are customers. You treat them just like we did the consumers that are buying on the website. Let's go all in with them.
It's so true. It's pretty easy to see through, the antics there. And I think that, as Amazon's grown their advertising business, that's a huge profit for them. And it's tied directly to products. So all of these other complicated issues can have a pretty steep impact to your ad revenue. So, Amazon's got to get their ducks in a line with this. And, it's not something that can be switched overnight. I think that's what they learned with the letter they sent in 2020 or 2019 is hey, this is not going to be something that can happen overnight. There's a lot of vendors who need this still, and we've slowly got to wean them off type of thing. So, it could be shifting and trying to force people more into a drop ship model. I hear a lot of that conversation happening right now with vendors trying to say, hey, this is always an option. This has been there for a long time. Why aren't you guys doing this? You guys known about it. Can you build that out? Let's, here's some, I haven't heard them recommend specific 3Ps to do it, but again, that's kind of where the gist of the conversation leads to. So it's really, weird and curious to see how 2023 plays out with all of that.
And what's really neat is if you go that route, whether you can do it internally, and if you're going to do it internally, you need more than one warehouse, because if you're shipping out of one, especially you're shipping on Amazon's account, they're going to calculate how much the shipping is going to be across the US. So you need to either have, 4 or 5. You probably get by with 3, or find, one of these, I call them a digital age 3PL. Right. Not your traditional big boys that have stuck their individual pick, pack, ship stations over in the corner, but nobody really wants to work on it, just like your warehouse doesn't. But what's really neat is when you go that route, now you can start playing around with different pack sizes, with different offerings, without having to send it out to a co-packer to repack. You want to try a 4-pack or a variety pack or a combo pack, whatever you want. You just upload the ASIN and it kicks out to them, and then they actually just go pick. You don't touch your packaging lines, which is the other thing, right?
Right.
And the manufacturing side, don't touch the packaging lines. They're highly efficient and they're running nonstop. But if you can just ship, 100 cases of 100 different products, and they can go pick them and match them, and then you can start actually getting real-time feedback on, oh, this one's moving or that one's not. I mean, it adds a lot to the product portfolio. It adds a lot of feedback from the customers, but also the price matching. If it's a completely different offering, right? It really breaks down that, which Amazon, obviously Walmart, all of them love to do.
Yeah, there's an interesting case. I've seen a brand that actually, to offset a lot of the price matching, what they do is they add in a specific, additional item with the product. So it's like, if you're selling, I don't know, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like a drum set or like a guitar or something like that. Hey, include like a DVD. No one uses DVDs. It's not going to matter. But now on that, specific brand, no one else can list it because no one else has that specific thing there. Maybe it's like a unique, add-on product to that. So bundling, I think, is a huge opportunity for brand protection as well when it comes to trying to, maintain your price integrity, maintain those types of things on the market as well. So that's interesting how that could lead to another source of, potential protection for your brand and also just your margins over time.
Right. Yeah. What's most exciting for you? What do you get you most pumped up? And then next question will be, any questions for me?
Yeah, good question. Most exciting for me. Well, ski season's kicking butt right now in Utah, so that's pretty exciting. But no, I'm pretty.
Wait, skiing or snowboarding? Which one?
I ski. Yeah.
Okay, me too. But I'm in Michigan. We ski on like
ice.
Yeah, it's not real, right?
You just get toboggans.
Yeah,
and
yeah, you saw a sled to the top. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited for. 2023 is, I think, it'd be a complicated year. And I like complications. I think that kind of drives me a little bit. So hearing all of these types of musings, like the recession coming, all of these, slowdowns in growth and things like that, we're seeing that in a lot of categories that are, I guess more of your expendable kind of categories, or your categories where it's not going to be an everyday purchase. Hey, I'm going to buy my milk every day. I'm not going to buy an air fryer every day. Or I'm not going to buy a, bicycle every day type of thing. So, last year I was buying a new bike and everywhere was sold out. I had to pay full retail. It was just insane. Now those same bikes are like 30% off. And I'm like, geez. Talking to people in the sporting and outdoor industries, inventory supply is just massive. So next year, I think, is going to be a weird one because we're going to see brands probably having to start to lower their prices again because everybody's been doing these cost increases and price increases. So I think we're going to start to see it go backwards a little bit to be able to compete and stay relevant on Amazon. Meanwhile, the cost structures aren't going to change much. I think that the fees, all of the storage facility costs, all of your transportation costs, everything else, probably going to maintain and still have a little bit higher than it was before. But so I think that margins are going to be reducing for a lot of brands. So these are things that I like think about, and I'm like, ooh, this is kind of interesting. And then I think about, okay, like what about brands from an advertising side? Like what's that going to have? Like what's going to be the net result there? Advertising so far has been really healthy. And I think Amazon's done a damn good job of making way more slotting fees than need to be on each of the, product detail pages. You go to a search page and on certain keywords, it's like 24, sponsored search ads, a sponsored brand video. I'm excited for the new sponsored brand video ads in the top of search there. But again, a lot of these things are predicated upon the 1P side of the business as well. So, it's going to be a weird year is what I'm kind of excited for, that it's not going to be a stagnated year. It's not, I think that, it's going to see some growth in certain categories. I think other categories are going to be down. Anything that's more, discretionary funding and discretionary related. I mean, Jeff Bezos even came out himself last month and said, hold your money, don't buy a new TV this year type of thing. Like, thanks, Jeff, you're screwing over your own company, but whatever. Like, interesting that he's seeing that writing on the wall as well. We see tons of companies, tons of banks kind of highlighting that same thing. We're starting to see the layoffs. We're just at kind of like the beginning of this cycle. And if we take anything, just look in the past, look what happened in 2008 and see where the opportunities are. From my side of things, I'm also excited for potential new innovation that can come from this. I mean, during COVID, we saw a lot of different innovation happening. Now it's like, hey, innovation is going to still pop up. People are still going to want things. And like, what are those trends that people are going to need is the real key. Like, are people shifting their mindset? They're not going to be spending much money on these things. Like, what would they spend on instead? So, being innovative is going to be the key for next year.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the investment that poured in to technology to enable, brands on the digital side of things was phenomenal over the past 2.5 years. And it's really pushed forward. Everybody talks about, well, e-commerce is pushed forward. Well, also all the tech that's needed to help people perform at a different level has come so far over the past few years. It's phenomenal what you're able to do now. Because of the investment that poured in. What I think we're going to see over the next year is, while we had 150 different, CDPs come on the scene, we're going to see the 5 that really, really had it work, right? Yeah. And we're going to have this trimming down of everybody got a shot. Now, who are the real winners in the space, and who can we place our bets on?
Sure.
Yeah. Any questions for me?
Yeah. I mean, what's your kind of outlook for Q1 versus rest of the year for next year for Amazon, for vendors? Like, what would you recommend to vendors during Q1? And then, based off of that, how does that affect the rest of the year for them?
Yeah. If I'm a brand right now, I'm scratching my head because Turkey 5 was so good. And I'm trying to understand in the next 3 weeks, so we're going to tell, is it so good because everybody saved up their money because they knew there's going to be massive discounts because they've been watching it and they couldn't just spend money the whole time. So they've been saving it up and they just got rid of it all. If I'm a brand, if I'm running something on the vendor side, number one, I am putting together a full project plan for taking me to the third party side. I'm not executing on it, but I need to put through the entire thing. So I know, is this a 3-month or is this a 6 months? Because if I keep running out of stock, then I need to pull a trigger. Now, that trigger could be one of two things. I'm going to third party side. I'm going to control my own inventory that's in there, or without. So that's one thing. The other side of it is, and so that's going to determine my budget, because if I don't have inventory, I'm not going to be spending as much because I know I'm going to go out of stock. Yeah. The other thing is, I'm finding a drop shipper, a digital age 3PL, that I can do extra inventory in, right? So Amazon's holding 2 weeks worth of inventory, maybe 2.5. And I know if I'm going to go all in on paid media on an item to get it moving, I'm going to have backup someplace else. And that backup has got to have 5 different facilities around so that it still gets the 1 or 2 day ship time. I'm starting then at that point in time to list on as many marketplaces as I can, where I'm going to own them. I'm going to remove any additional third-party resellers that are out there. And then I'm looking at the new tech that's out there that's going to allow me to separate myself from everybody else. The QR codes, I don't, we can get to the direct to consumer side. How can I get more out of my paid media? And then I'm partnering closely with my direct to consumer team to look at holistically, what does paid media spend look like? Yep. And because there's tools now, especially with Amazon, you can drive traffic to your own direct to consumer site. Well, if I'm going to ship, if I can drop ship, for anywhere. Well, now, do I really care where it moves from? Do I care if it sells on Amazon, or do I care if it ships from my direct to consumer site? I want to be, as that leader, the CDO, it's I don't care where it ships from. I just want it to go out the door. I want to be wherever it's at, and I want the customer to get it and them to be happy. So that's kind of long-winded. I think there is, I think there's lack of training that's out there. So I'm aggressively looking for new training modules that are out there. I don't think you can do a lot of the cookie cutter ones. I think you have to bring in people that really know what they're doing, because everybody's business is separate. So I'm looking for those and pouring into my team and let them know it's going to be a rocky year. So it's kind of long-winded, but it's so hard to be in digital right now.
It is. Yeah, that's really good advice though. And also I would echo all of those kind of aspects that you mentioned. So it's going to be a very strange year for 2023. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, that's where I'm. Well, we're right here. We're going to wrap up. Garrett, Thanks again for your time today. Thanks for jumping on and help educate the community. Thanks for being such a great partner, supporter of the network as a whole. Again, everybody, Garrett Bloom at Drafted Commerce, find him on LinkedIn, reach out to him if you have questions in this space. All around great person. With that, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks again, everybody, for listening in. Take care now.